I'd like to introduce Barry Kramer, who's here with us today, and welcome him. He's a legend in terms of local basketball, and many consider him the greatest high school basketball player ever produced in Section 2. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here.
Could you tell us a little something about growing up in Schenectady and where you first started to play the game?
Well, I grew up near Knott Terrace High School off of Eastern Avenue. And I went to Knott Terrace for 1 year before Linton was built. I played at Elmer Avenue Playground most of the time in my youth, and then later branched out and went to all the parks in Schenectady, Central Park, the City Museum I would go and play. And I was always looking for new players to play against, and that's kind of how I learned the game. But in addition to that, through the Parks and Recreation program in Schenectady, I met Walt Prislow. He was the head of that program, and he traveled from playground to playground, so he knew me as a youngster. So that was really where I started to develop as a ball player. Originally, I started out playing in the Jewish Community Center, the YMCA, as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and it took me a while before I started to grow and get my coordination.
I know Joey Loudis, who is a local athlete who was just a great athlete, has always talked about seeing you play as a youngster. And Joey maybe was advanced. He was a baseball player, basketball player, tennis player. He could do everything well at a young age. And he said when he first saw you, you weren't the first guy picked, but no. He said to himself, that player is going to be special. You just wait and see when he grows into that body.
I don't know how he really could have thought that, but then as in later junior high school years, maybe he did. Maybe he saw some potential in me. He says he did. He was the greatest junior high school player I ever saw. Yeah. He was by far the best player. Averaged sometimes 60 points a game on a team where I played very little. In the 8th grade, I didn't even play on the 8th grade team. In the 9th grade, we played, instead of for Central Park Junior High School, we didn't have a team. We played for the Jewish Community Center. And on that team, I got a little better playing with Joey. We were best friends. I went to Grout Park, his side of town, and played with him after school on occasion. And I tried to, learn from him because he was the greatest junior high school player of my time.
And you mentioned Walt Prislow. Walt Prislow was the basketball coach at Knott Terrace. And as you mentioned, at the end of your sophomore year, Knott Terrace closed, Linton opened. Tell us a little something about playing for Walt Prislow.
Well, I always mention him whenever I have a chance because he was, next to my father, the greatest influence in my life. He saw something in me no one else had ever seen. He gave me a chance to play. I love to tell the story that I tried out at Knott Terrace, and when the list went up as to who made the team, as opposed to who got cut, I was on the list of making the team, and all of my friends said, how can that be? How can Barry be on the team?
You were a sophomore, correct?
I was in the 10th grade. Yeah. Everyone was shocked. And then he took me and he played me with the JV kids early on, and then he decided he was going to put me on the varsity. And of course, I got beat by a lot of good players. Big Bob McCulley from Little Falls, good big players. I was a sophomore, I was a 10th grader. But I got better, but he gave me my opportunity.
And I believe your sophomore year, you had a great win at the end of the year against Mount Pleasant. Is that correct?
That's
right.
Upset
Upset them. And then your next 2 years were very special. I believe you possibly lost one game as a junior, and then you were undefeated as a senior.
Yeah, and in that game we lost by 42 points.
And you came back and beat that team by a point.
By one.
In Schenectady. Yes,
Amsterdam.
Yeah, I've heard that story. But you want to tell us a little bit maybe about the undefeated team in 1959-60?
Well, I would like to say first that the team, when I was a junior with Billy Connors and Don DeLuca, and Jackie Washington and Bob Siglerski was also a great team.
Yeah.
It was a freak thing that we lost because that was a tremendous team. Obviously, Billy Connors was a pro athlete. Don DeLuca was a Division I athlete.
I didn't want to bring up a 40-point loss.
But that was a great team. And then that transitioned into the next year where I played with Jackie was a year better. Washington was a junior then. great player, and Seaman and Murray were tremendous players. My cousin Mike Sarr. So that was just a great team. Just a bunch of guys that had known each other our whole lives, played with and against each other. Prisblo knew us since the time we were kids. Kind of bodes well for youth programs to make for better high school teams, because Prisblo knew us through the Parks and Recreation program.
Right, went hand in hand. And of course, Jimmy Seaman and Bob Murray went on to play at Syracuse.
They played for Syracuse. Jack Washington was recruited and went to Dayton, which was a great Division I power. In fact, he was their best player as a freshman. I heard about this through some scouts at NYU. So you have four Division I players on that one team, and my cousin Mike went to Union, played for Union, and he was a very good player too.
And you were a first-team Parade Magazine All-American.
Yeah, that was amazing.
That's quite an honor.
Haskell Cohn came and saw me play. I got 37 against Amsterdam. Picked me one of the top 5 high school players in the country, which of course is probably not true. I mean, it's how many kids play high school basketball. But Haskell Cohn is the reason I got so many scholarship offers, because that parade is seen everywhere. And that gave me a start for college.
And you did score over 1,000 points as a high school player.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your recruitment. I mean, obviously a player of your stature, first-team Parade, Magazine All-American. What schools came calling?
Well, everybody came calling. I visited various schools. I went to Kentucky. I made Adolph Rupp. I went with Bill Rapavy. We had a great time down there. They lost to Tennessee, and Adolph Rupp wasn't very happy. That was the game we saw. They hadn't lost to Tennessee in 27 years, and we were at the game they lost. And they had a party for me afterwards, and he was in such a terrible mood, of course, having lost that game. Went to Kentucky, went to Cincinnati, which was a power at that time. Oscar was playing there.
Right, Oscar was...
I didn't see him. He wasn't there when I was there, and I was there a whole week. I was in Cincinnati a whole week. He wasn't back yet. It was just before school started. I almost went to Cincinnati. I went to Maryland, which was in the ACC. Played in College Park, Maryland. I went to Duke on a little private plane. My mother, my father, my sister went to Duke. We were in Durham. I went to Dartmouth. I went to NYU. I went to many schools, visited many schools.
And ultimately you chose NYU. Was there a reason, or?
Yeah, there was a reason. I wanted to stay close to home. I think partially because of my wife, Pat, who was my girlfriend back through high school from the time we were 15, and also my relationship with my parents, wanting my parents to be able to see me play, and my father, who loved to watch me play. And I knew I'd be playing in Madison Square Garden, and it didn't turn out to be a bad thing.
Now, I was just going to mention that people today, NYU is a Division III program, but when you arrived in 1960, it was a big-time program, had played in the NCAA Final Four, and I believe got to the championship game.
That's right. They went to the semifinals, lost to Ohio State in 1960 with Satch Sanders, when Jerry Lucas and Havlicek were playing for Ohio State.
So you arrive in the fall of 1960. You have to play freshman ball in those days.
That's right.
One of your teammates and classmates was Happy Hairston.
Yes.
And
he was a tremendous player.
Right. He went on to a great career at NYU and then in the NBA.
Now, I had a tough time as a freshman. I'm a slow starter. I always was. And I played for a guy, a freshman coach at NYU, Jack Rowan. And everyone has a different opinion. If you talk to Don Blaha, Rowan coached Blaha as well, he loved Jack Rowan. I did not like Jack Rowan. I don't think Jack Rowan liked me. And I went through hell that freshman year because Rowan was on me mentally, telling me I was overrated and things of that nature. And I had a very tough time. I think, fortunately for me, if he would have had any influence over the next year, he then went to Columbia and became the coach at Columbia. He coached some great players, Jim McMillan and others. He was a great coach. We had like a personality clash, I think, is what it really was. But then, as a sophomore, playing with Harrison at NYU, we were good, but only to get better.
You played for Lou Rossini?
Yes.
And I'm not sure what your sophomore year was like in terms of.
We were 20-5. We went to the NCAA, lost to Villanova in the Sweet 16. After having led by 12 at halftime, we should have never lost. Rossini told us to slow it down. We couldn't run away from them, and in fact, they caught us because we lost momentum. We were very good, and we would have probably beaten Wake Forest and gone to the Final Four had we won that game, which is very sad. That was a great team, 20-5. And next year we were even better. We lost to Duke in the Sweet 16, but we were as good as any team in the country.
And your junior year is your best year of college basketball.
That was my best year, yes.
You averaged, I believe, 29.3 points per
I
game and
yeah.
Lost the scoring title by just a tenth of a point.
That's
to Nick Workman from
That's
Seton
true.
Hall.
Nick Workman from Seton Hall. Had I scored 29 against West Virginia in the final game. Had I think scored 33, I would have had the scoring title.
Wow. And like you said, the games are in Madison Square Garden. What was that like? That's where you played most of your home games, right?
What an almost every home game.
Right.
A few we played up in our campus in the Bronx, but what an atmosphere. Double headers every Thursday night in the Garden. It was amazing.
Yeah, college basketball.
We played the marquee game. Usually Fordham or Manhattan played the first game. And every night packed. College basketball went through different cycles in the Garden. And in the early 60s, college basketball was the thing. The Garden was packed. The pros drew nothing. We went to Knick games, 3,000, 4,000 people. The college games, 20,000 people. And it was exciting.
And you scored 42 in the Garden a couple times, I believe.
Opened up the first game against Georgetown. Everyone was scared. Harrison went academically ineligible, couldn't play. We're opening against Georgetown in the Garden. Everyone thinks we're going to get whipped. I score 42, break the school record, and we win. We win big. And we go on to continue to win.
And that year, your junior year, you were an AP first-team All-American?
Yes.
You played in 2 NCAA tournaments.
Yes.
And you had some big scoring games in those tournaments.
Yeah, I scored 100 points in the East Regionals in 1963. Scored, if I can remember, and I can't exactly, but scored 100 points, got 34 against Duke, got a lot of points in the East Regionals.
Right.
And we lost to Duke by 5 points, which was sad because we could have won that game.
And of course, the rules were slightly different then. No three-point shot. You didn't benefit from three-pointers or anything like that. Your senior year?
We struggled. I struggled. I hurt my ankle. Probably should have redshirted. Should not have played. Tried to play after coming out of a cast. Had gained about 10 pounds in the meantime. Lost a step. Lost a little jump. And we struggled. We had a tough year.
And at the end of that year, you are drafted into the NBA, I believe the 8th pick by the San Francisco Warriors.
I was the 8th pick out of 9 teams and drafted by the Warriors. Then the San Francisco Warriors, now the Golden State Warriors.
Right. Barry, during your junior year, you played in the Holiday Festival in Madison Square Garden, which was a big event in those days, really big. I believe there were 8 teams?
Yes.
And you were MVP.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little something about that event?
That was one of the 2 biggest thrills of my life, Bob.
Wow.
That MVP award and being sworn in as a judge in 1994. It's 2 different things, but when I was a junior, we played in that tournament in Madison Square Garden. I'd watched it over the years because Priz used to bring us to it.
Yes,
We
I
watched
remember.
it. You went there as a player. Now I'm playing in it. Illinois is ranked 2nd in the nation. They're one of the teams in the tournament. We ultimately play against Illinois. And I have an unbelievable game. I scored 42 against Illinois. They have Billy Burwell from Boys High, and they have a guy named Dave Downey who was an All-American. It was a tremendous game, but we lost by a few points. And so we end up playing in the consolation game in the tournament, and Illinois plays West Virginia in the finals. I'm sitting up in the Garden with my parents. And the sports information director from NYU is looking for me and calling my name, Barry, Barry, Barry. At the end of the West Virginia-Illinois game, Illinois won the tournament. And he says, come on with me. His name is Stan Saplin. And I go down with him, and I'm walking down. I'm going down the stairs into the gut of the garden. And now the game has ended. And I hear John Condon, the announcer of in the Garden, famous announcer, he was there for 50 years, saying, and now the MVP of the 1963 Holiday Festival, he's from NYU. I never heard my name. I didn't know why I was going down there, but I did see Don Dunphy, who was the fight announcer who was going to apparently present the award. And my adrenaline was pumping, and I got to the microphone there, and Don Dunphy said to me, Barry, what do you have to say? You got the MVP. What do you have to say? And I was speechless. I'm never speechless. He said, well, your play spoke for itself. And that was it. That was probably the biggest thrill of my life, winning that award. And the way it came about, not knowing I was going to get it, and there it was. And not even playing in the final game. That was the strange part of it. They're fortunate I was even there. My game had ended 2 hours before.
It says a lot for the quality of your play, to not be in the championship game and to be selected.
Unbelievable.
Imagine if we had ESPN and your games had been televised in those days. You would have been a real hero throughout the country. I mean, you were known throughout the country, and I know local people used to travel down. Bob Weaver used to come down on the bus or the train and attend most of your games. And
Bob Weaver came to every game, Bob, and he kept score. But I got to tell you something else that's unbelievable. I had bad luck in respect to the media coverage was not there in those days, except New York City covered it sometimes on TV within the city. Marty Glickman, people like that. But on top of that, when I was a junior, there was a newspaper strike. No newspapers in New York City, none, for months. So when I played a game, I had to go read the Newark Star-Ledger, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I think Newsday on the island was still publishing. But every other paper was not running.
And while you were a first-team All-American that year, I believe Art Heyman got Player of the Year.
Yes,
Duke.
he did.
And you probably would have been close, or were close.
It would have been close. It might have been close.
But you maybe suffered a bit from the lack of publicity from the local
just
newspapers, which were big in those days, the newspaper
Well,
coverage.
there were papers that you've never heard of. Now I can't think of the Telegraph, and New York City had many, the Journal American, many newspapers, not just the New York Times, not just the Post, not just the News, the Daily News, but many other newspapers, and all of them were on strike.
And while you were at NYU, you did play with some other local players, including Don Blah.
Yes, my good friend.
Yeah,
good friend and a great athlete.
Oh,
great athlete.
Basketball, baseball.
Don, who I high jumped against in high school, who beat me, by the way, and won the state championship, who I played basketball against, who was one of the great high school players here locally, who played for NYU, and I watched him play when I was a freshman, unable to play, and he was a sophomore, actually started sometimes at forward for NYU. Played with me as a junior. We played together on that great team. And he was an undefeated pitcher as a sophomore at NYU. Beat Larry Bernarth, who ended up playing for the Mets. Don Blah was a great athlete, and we've been friends for many, many years.
And probably a better person than he was athlete.
He's the greatest.
He is. They
don't come any better. Anybody who knows him knows that that's true. But he's been a friend for years, and great guy.
Thank you.
2 minutes.
Anything else you'd like to reflect on, whether it be high school, college, players you played against, stories at NYU, from Linton?
Well, I'd like to mention your friend and mine, if I could, Gary Prisblow.
Yes.
Gary was a great player in his own right. He was Walt's son. Gary and David, two boys who grew up in the Prisblow household, were both great players. Gary played for Michigan State, and David played for Wichita State. But Gary was closer in age to me, and we were very close and played together for years. Knocked out my teeth a few times, did battle with me. He had, I think, misfortune of having to play for his father. I think that was a difficult cross to bear for both father and son. You were on that team, and because Gary was he was a special player, a guy who, like the Pat Riley type, who didn't have the tremendous athleticism to begin with, but then built it, became a 6'7" high jumper, could shoot and jump, out of the gym. Only a guy maybe 6'1". So Gary died very prematurely, but I like to mention him because I played with him for years as a kid and then beyond, and he and I were close friends, and his father was a great coach, but very difficult to coach your own son.
It is. And Gary was a special athlete, as you said, 6 feet tall, high jump 6'7", the old Western roll. This
That's
wasn't
right.
the Fosbury flop.
Which means he would have been a 7-foot high
Yeah.
jumper had he known how to do it.
I believe
that
at Michigan State he did go up to 6'10" or 6'11" in his freshman year. But yeah, Gary was a special player and a special athlete, and we all dearly
a
miss
special
him.
guy. And
He really was.
We do miss him.
Yeah, it was-
We miss him very much.
Any other reflections about growing up in Schenectady and playing basketball here, the competition, Walt Frisblow?
Well, I can just tell you that I loved it. But when I grew up, Bob, even a little before you grew up, probably about 7 years between us, there was nothing else to do.
Right.
We were lucky we had a car in our family, and we had no money, and we didn't travel anywhere. And so the summer was every day for me. My father would say, "What are you going to do today?" And I say, "I'm going to the playground." And that's all I did, and I loved it. And I looked for different places to play for that reason. I loved playing in Schenectady, and Schenectady was a basketball hotbed. Had the two schools been combined, we would have been unbelievable, because as you know, we went from junior high school, some of us, depending on where we lived, Joey Loudis, Pat Maney, Chuck Neidl, they went to Mount Pleasant. I went to Knott Terrace, and obviously those were the two rivals and great teams, but the basketball in Schenectady was absolutely tremendous. I would say back then even a hotbed of high school basketball.
And we were talking earlier, those pickup games in the parks of Schenectady, Central Park and others, included yourself, Jack Washington, whom you mentioned earlier, who just lost 2 games in 3 years of high school ball, Bobby DeLuca, who was all Ivy League at Cornell, Tom Chestnut, who played at Princeton, Gary Prisblow, Jimmy Tedisco, and the games were just fierce, competitive.
It was tremendous.
They were a lot of fun.
Well, it feeds on itself in one respect, because you want to emulate those who came before you. Just like when I was a kid and I watched, Tom Mossy and Ducky Castell and Murray Melton play, and Bill Curvin, who's a couple years older than me, and Jordan at Mount Pleasant, and even back before them, the fellows like Muzzy Mazzaroni and John Morsey, and you wanted to be those people. You never thought you could because they seemed so big and so strong and so good, but you tried to be like they were. And Chestnut, you mentioned him because he's a perfect example. He used to follow me around.
Yeah.
He was a young kid. He'd come and find me and want to play with me. He was a 16-year-old high school kid. And I think because you play against better competition, you're always looking for the better competition. You get better. You get better. And my father always used to say to me, "Barry, be careful. Don't play out of your class. You'll get hurt." He was right in one respect, because you could get hurt, but on the other hand, that was the only way to get better, to look for the better in the older players. I remember playing against older kids years ago, and I wasn't a shooter or anything like that when I was young, but I remember hearing the older kids say, "Watch that kid, he can jump." And it stuck in my mind, and it made me motivated to jump higher and do it more, But I played against bigger kids,
You were a great jumper, and I wouldn't say this on my own, but several people have said it to me. It seemed like you just stayed at the top of your jump when you had that jump shot, and people would come back down and you'd still be up there and get off a shot that, more times than not went in.
It's true that at the height of my career, that's what separated me and allowed me to get good shots.
And it wasn't just locally. I remember seeing an interview with Dave Bing, who starred at Syracuse and was in the NBA, and they asked him about his game, and he said, I wanted to develop a good first quick step, just like Barry Kramer, and that caught my attention. And then, having gone to Union, I remember you came over and played with us a few times, and I think you were maybe at Albany Law at the time, and I can remember the student body in the gym saying, "That's Barry Kramer," and you were an idol and a hero to many of them.
That's great. That's great.
How about Pat Riley? When was your first encounter with Pat?
Well, I met Pat when he was in junior high school and I was in high school. And there was an alumni game at Central Park. I have a picture. It's the funniest picture. All of us went back to play. Joey from Mount Pleasant, Joe Loudis, and myself and Jimmy Seaman. Those of us, we all went to Central Park Junior High School. Pat Maney, Chuck Neidel. And we played against Pat and his junior high school team. He was in the 9th grade. And he was like pushing me around. And I said, "Who is this kid? You know, who is this kid?" And I knew then that he was something special, very, very advanced beyond his years.
Yes, very big success.
And a success beyond comparison when you look at his career through, high school, college, and pros, and then his coaching career. Absolutely unbelievable. But in terms of his basketball ability, he was a guy that worked at the game. I don't think he had as much natural ability as some, but he kept getting better. He was a better college player at Kentucky than he was a high school player. And then he ended up in the NBA, and he hung on and played on many good teams. He kept getting better. He was really a great athlete.
Fierce competitor.
Fierce competitor.
Barry, I want to thank you for this segment.
Pleasure, Bob.
Great job, and I have to say I really enjoyed watching you play.
I enjoyed playing with and against you as well.
Well, I didn't get to see you actually play in high school and college, but after that, to spend time with you and be on the same court with you was. I can remember when I was in high school and we'd go play difficult games against Philip Schuyler and things like that, and I'd look at the other end and say, "Whoa, they look like they're pretty good." And I said, "But I've been playing against Barry Kramer all week. They don't have a Barry Kramer down there."
And
so.
I was always there watching you too.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Been very supportive. I know you coached us in Summer League. You came to the gym. I can still picture you, where you sat, and I thank you for your support then and now. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob.